Thank you, everybody. Thank you, half of you. The other half are still having coffee. It's really great to be back at Owners Summit. I think it was 2016. I had so much fun. I love this room. I love this group. We're going to have a lot of fun. This is going to be really messy because I'm going to try to attempt to do something that we don't have enough time to do. Are you up for this? Okay. So Carl's enthusiastically up for this. All right, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to talk at you for a little while, then we're going to do some exercises. I'm going to give you 2 exercises to do. There's going to be a little break between the exercises. The exercises are going to take 10 minutes each. This room is going to get chaotic because they're going to be one-on-one exercises. I'm going to ask you to choose a partner and do the exercise with a partner. We'll get to that in about 15, 20, maybe 25 minutes, depending on how things go. Okay, hands up. I'd just like to do this survey. If you've read this book, The Win Without Pitching Manifesto, my first book, that's great. Thank you. I appreciate it. As Mark said, it just sales continue to go up year after year. Sales last year were up 87% over the year before. It's really been kind of a humbling experience for me as an author to write a book that has that kind of legs and has been so well received by the creative community. So I'm really appreciative of it. And those of you who haven't read it, like, what's stopping you? There's just so many books to sell. Speaking of books to sell, how many of you have read this book, my latest book? Oh, that's pretty good. 10 maybe? 10 of you? 11, 12? Nobody ever puts their hand up really high. It's like they're going to be outed with, have you ever done this? Nobody ever goes, oh, me. So Pricing Creativity came out in January of 2018. That's last year. It's been about 13 months. The Win Without Pitching Manifesto I view as the Yes You Can book. My goal was you could read this on an airplane or in a really long bathroom break. Maybe not quite. But you could read it on an airplane. And I wanted you to finish the book and go, damn it, there's a better way to do this. This being agency new business development. And it's short on kind of specific how-tos. It's got 12 principles listed as proclamations. The Pricing Creativity, A Guide to Profit Beyond the Billable Hour, my new book, it's in manual form. It's in 3 different forms. We'll talk about that at the end. But I really wrote this as a manual. It's really meant to be the here's how-to book. And specifically on the subject of pricing, but it talks about a lot of or it delivers specific how-tos on a lot of the things that are touched on in the manifesto book. Now, I had somebody say to me recently, it looks like a pharmaceutical sales manual. I apologize for that. I assure you that the contents of the book are actually pretty good. So the topic for today is mastering the value conversation. I'll explain to you what that means. Really, the overarching theme or topic of the day is pricing, and specifically the benefits of value-based pricing, of pricing based not on the inputs of time and materials, not on the market value or your cost of outputs, so not on inputs, not on outputs, but on the outcomes or the value that you create or propose to create for your client. So that's kind of the overarching theme. I really want to drill down into what I see as the next level of value-based pricing, and that's the value conversation. Now, Carl was kind enough to have me on the Bureau podcast 6 or 8 months ago, and we were talking about this a little bit, and I said, you know, if I can't just talk about the value conversation. I can't talk to you about what mastering the value conversation will do to you and for you. You have to experience it, and you have to experience it through an exercise I've devised. It's the one where the penny should drop. And I'll give you some theory about the value conversation before, and you'll go, yeah, that makes sense. No, we're pretty good at that. And then once you do the exercise, you'll see that you're horrible at it. And a whole new vista, like a Blairtopian vista, will open before your very eyes. What could possibly go wrong with that kind of setup? Let's begin with a question, and the question is this. Who's calling? The question is, what do you suppose the goal of value-based pricing is? Anyone? Come on, people. We're all friends here, right? Most of you have been here every year. Right here? To make sure the work that you're providing has value to the client. That's a good answer. Anybody else? Maximize profit. That's a common one. That's also a good answer. Anyone else? Stephen? Get paid for the value, not the time. Anyone else? Right here? You're not bickering about money, you're talking about the project. Somebody said freedom. Yeah. Those are all good answers. It's not the answer that I want to share with you. I'm not going to give you the answer. I'm going to ask you the question again after you do the exercise and see if you come up with the answer. Okay, let's talk about financial success. I'm going to make a lot of hasty generalizations in my talk, as I want to do. And the first generalization I will make, and they're helpful, that's why I make them, not because I'm lazy. Maybe I'm a bit lazy. But the first generalization I will make is there are 3 levels of financial success that you can attain in your firm. And I can take all of the firms that I've worked with in my training company, Win Without Pitching, and previous to that when we're a consulting company, and I can, if they're successful, I can slot them in at one of these 3 levels of success. And the first level of success is the idea of efficiencies, the efficient firm. Now, I do a podcast with David C. Baker called Two Bobs. Hands up if you've ever listened to it. Just curious. Hey, that's pretty good. Great. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. David is a data scientist posing as a consultant to independent creative firms. He really is. He has data on more than 1,000 independent creative firms. And he's got some benchmarks that have been adopted by other consultants and lots of firms in the industry that say if you hit a certain utilization rate and you keep your overhead to a certain percentage of your AGI, then you should be able to hit a certain profit target. So there's these 3 key numbers that he talks about often, and they're often associated with one of his models. And the billable efficiency number, I never remember, it's in my book, but I never remember if it's 60% or 65%. How many of you understand what I mean by billable efficiency or utilization rates? Right? So most of you understand what we're talking about when I talk about the efficient firm. The efficient firm is the firm that strives to make best use of its resources, specifically time. So if there are X number of hours, so you take 1,500 or 2,000 or somewhere in between there, depending on what model you're using, of hours per person in your firm, let's say there's 10, let's say you're using 1,500 hours per year per person, there are 10 people in your firm, you're at 15,000 hours. It's that utilization rate is what percentage of those hours get billed to the client. Right? So I have seen the pursuit of efficiencies save struggling firms, get them to that first level of success. And that's the efficient firm, where you bill as many hours as you can. The second level of success is what I will call the progressive pricers. I'm going to share with you some rules of pricing creativity that I talk about in my book. And the first 4 rules that I share with you, the first one kind of speaks to value-based pricing, but if you just follow the first 3 rules, maybe the first 4 rules, I think the average firm in a room like this can increase your profit year over year by 50% on average, actually quite easily. So just by following some progressive pricing principles, you should be able to make more money. That's the second level of success. And when we get to some of these principles or some of these rules, I'll ask you who's using them, and we'll get a sense of how successful they are. But there's the third level of success. So I've seen lots of efficient firms, and over the last year or so, I've seen lots of firms move to progressive pricing models. So I've seen lots of firms increase the amount of money they earn significantly just by applying a few simple rules. But that third level of success, it's something entirely different. There are very few creative or marketing or digital firms out there that operate, that have mastered the value conversation. But once you master the value conversation, which is rule number 5 that I'm going to talk about, once you master this, everything will change for you. I believe the value conversation, it's got a simple 4-step framework where I'll teach you the framework, you're going to use it in the exercise. I believe the ability to facilitate a meaningful value conversation is the most valuable skill in all of business. With no exaggeration, I believe this is the most valuable skill in all of business. And it's really difficult to master for reasons that you're about to find out. So before we get to the value conversation, mastering the value conversation is the 5th rule of 6 rules in the book. I'd like to talk about some other rules. Let me give you the first 3 rules first. And I think if you follow the first 3 rules, you should be able to make more money fairly easily. How many of you come from the tech side of things? Hands up. Your own personal training or experience? Okay, hands down. How many of you come from the design side of things? Okay, so those of you who are designers, you sell logos, among other things. If a client says to you, will you do a logo for me? There's always one defiant designer in the room. I'll do a corporate identity, but not a logo. You heathen. Sorry, I shouldn't pick on people that nobody will reply, will they? What do you charge for a logo? It always begins with awkward silence, and then somebody throws out a number, and that number is? Sorry? Not enough? It's usually 10,000, and then there's what? $300. And then somebody goes 500. And I say, do I hear 1,000? And then the numbers go up, and then somebody gets to the right answer. Yeah. These are all variations of the right answer. The right answer is that depends. But do you ever think about what it depends on? So I talk about this in the book. If you've read the book, I'll ask you to keep quiet when I ask the audience the following questions. Does anybody know what Phil Knight paid design student Carolyn Davidson in 1971 to design the Nike swoosh? All good guesses, pretty close. $35 in 1971, so $200 in today's money. So logos cost $200, right? We've established that. The market value for logos is $200. That's what Nike paid. Does anybody know what design firm Arnell charged PepsiCo in 2008 to update the Pepsi logo? 2 million? 1 million. $1 million. What's that? So we've established that logos cost $1 million. We've established that logos cost between $200 and $1 million. One price is 5,000 times the other price. So my question, the real answer to the question is, well, that depends. My question to you is, what does it depend on? It doesn't depend on the quality of the creative. I'm pretty sure we wouldn't all agree that the Pepsi logo is 5,000 times better than the Nike logo. It doesn't depend on the time it took the designer to design it. That would be absurd, right? We would agree here, that would be absolutely absurd in both cases. Nothing to do with the inputs of time. It depended on the value of that logo to the client at that time. So, do you think when Ms. Davidson handed the Nike swoosh over to Phil Knight and he handed the check over to her, do you think that was fair? Do you feel like that price, $200 in today's money, was fair to Carolyn Davidson? Yeah. Anybody think it wasn't fair? Do you think she was a design student? I would suggest it was fair. She handed over the work, he handed over the money, they both said thank you, they both meant it, they both felt like they were better off and they would both do the transaction again. That, ladies and gentlemen, is how trade lifts people out of poverty. Trade. Nothing's an idea for money, both parties are better off, both parties would do it again. That double thank you moment. 10 years later, do you think Ms. Davidson still thought that price was fair? I don't know for sure, but I suggest she still thought it was fair. As Nike became successful, the value of that, having done that work, increased, right? She essentially didn't do it for the money, she did it for the portfolio. And as the brand became successful, it became more valuable to her. Now, maybe 20 years later, when Nike was worth multi-billions of dollars. Maybe she started to get a sense that that wasn't fair. And maybe that's why Phil Knight gifted to Ms. Davidson a Nike ring, a diamond ring in the shape of the Nike swoosh, and an undisclosed amount of stock rumored to be worth $12 million. There are some issues about whether or not the IP had transferred as well. Do you think the $1,000 that Arnell charged Pepsi was fair? Does anybody think it wasn't fair? Sorry, did I say 1,000? Yeah. Do you think the $1 million that Arnell charged Pepsi was fair? What's that? Did the firm get other revenue? Or yeah, I think those are good questions, just not relevant to the topic here. Sorry, that sounded harsher than. I mean, those are good. Those are good questions, and I would want to know those questions. But I think in isolation, on its own, I think if Peter Arnell had read my book, maybe he could have got 20 million, because I think the same double thank you moment happened. And the reason I think he could have got 20 million is because about the same time PepsiCo redesigned the Pepsi logo, they also redesigned the Tropicana Pure Orange Juice packaging. This is the old packaging, and this is the new packaging. And does anybody know what happened when the new packaging hit the stores? Sales dropped by $37 million in the 2 months it took for PepsiCo to restore the old packaging to the shelves. And my estimation is, PepsiCo doesn't publish sales by brand, but my estimation is if the same drop in sales had hit the Pepsi brand, the mothership brand, it would have cost them between $200 and $500 million. What is the price of a logo? The answer is that depends. Rule number one of pricing creativity is you price the client, not the job or the service. Because it would be absurd to charge a startup for the same work that you would charge a multi-billion-dollar brand. It would be absolutely the height of insanity. Rule number one, price the client, not the job. Rule number two, always offer options. When you put forward your proposals to your clients, you always make sure it isn't just one option with one price. It's multiple options, ideally 3, 4 is fine, 3 is better than 2, 5 starts to introduce the complexity of choice, the paradox of choice. Okay, why do we offer options? Let me ask you this question. What is the size of that stick? Not as you see it on the screen, not as you imagine it to be on my screen. In real life, what is the length of that stick? Anyone? You can't tell. Why can't you tell? You need context. You can't determine the length of that stick unless I put something next to it, like a tennis ball or a ruler or Saturn. Right? Only then you will be able to determine the length of the stick. I'm getting to the rule is always offer options. The importance of options was driven home to me when I was reading William Poundstone's book, Priceless. And I was lying in bed reading it, and I saw this image in Poundstone's book by MIT cognitive scientist Edward Adelson. And in his book, Poundstone says there are 2 lettered squares, A and B. You can see them? And he says the color of those squares, the squares are the same color, but your brain doesn't see them that way. And my reaction was the same as your reaction is now. What? No. And Poundstone said to me through his book, yes, they are, Blair. Get out of bed, get a bunch of pieces of paper, cover up all of the remaining squares, except for the 2 lettered ones. And when you finally cover up the last square, you'll hear a click in your brain, and you'll see that indeed they are the same color. So I'm saving you the trouble here. You can now see that this the same color. When I did this, I got out of bed, I got the pieces of paper, I covered up all of the other squares, And when I covered the final square, I did indeed hear that click in my brain, and I saw that they were the same color. And that's when I knew you had to deliver options in your proposal. Why? Because human beings can't subjectively perceive absolute values. I just showed you a stick. You can't tell how long the stick is. You need context. Almost everything in your life is subjective. It's actually scary. Even most of the objective measures in your life are subjective. So what that means is I can make you think, if you allow me to control the context, I can make you think that black is white, like Adelson did. I can make you think that heavy is light. I can make you think that wet is dry, that dim is bright. All of these things. I can make you think all of these things if you let me control the comparisons. When you put a proposal in front of your client for $20,000 a month, one proposal, one price, you're asking them to make a decision their brain isn't wired to make, and that is this proposal worth $20,000 a month? They need context. So if you put forward a single solution, single price proposal, you force your client to leave, either physically or mentally, and go get the context against which to compare your proposal. You offer options so that you can control the comparisons. Make sense? How many of you, hands up, use multi-option proposals? You've seen for yourself that when you put a multi-option proposal in front of your client, you change the question, and their brain goes to work trying to answer the question it is equipped to answer, which is not, is this worth $10,000, $20,000 a month, whatever it was. It's which of these is the best value? What is the best way to work with your firm? Rule number 1, price the client. Rule number 2, offer options. Rule number 3, anchor high. Anybody read Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow? Small number of you. So Kahneman talks about 2 systems of thinking, system 1 and system 2. Anchoring is the principle that the first piece of information we're exposed to on a subject affects our final decision on that subject if we're making a decision on it. Your client naturally anchors low by starting a negotiation with a low price. You naturally, intuitively know to anchor high with a high price. What Kahneman's work showed, he calls it anchoring and adjusting. So the first piece of information we get on a subject when we're making a decision is we engage system 1, which uses something called heuristics, mental shortcuts, to make these leaps, essentially leaps in judgment. System 1 is a very cognitively efficient way of thinking. We're coming up with things really quickly. So we use system 1 to make a quick decision, and then we use, if it's a considerable decision that we're making, then we engage system 2, which is cognitively very expensive. And we use a lot of reasoning and analytics and sometimes outright math, and we start to reason away from the conclusion that we jump to via system 1. So we use system 1 to jump to a conclusion, and if somebody anchors with us, that's the conclusion, that's the starting point that we'll jump to. And then we say, well, wait a minute, that isn't right. And we start to engage system 2, and we start to reason away from the anchor. And what all the science shows is we have this idea of what an acceptable range is, and in price, it's an acceptable price range. And somebody's anchored out here. So we start here, and we reason away, and what all the science shows is we stop just inside what we consider to be a rational range. So we either anchor high, and the client moves this way, or the client anchors low, and we move this way. Anchor or be anchored. Anchoring is so powerful, it cannot be undone even when you know it's being done to you. And the first time I said that, that was known to be true. There are now 3 known ways to undo their anchoring effect. Your clients don't know what they are. Anchoring high means when you're delivering your 3-price proposal, your 3-option proposal, you start with the highest, most expensive price. So a few years ago in Atlanta, I did a seminar with my colleague David C. Baker. There were 70 people in the room, and I sent everybody an email in advance of the event. And everybody got this email that said, thinking of the firms that will be in the room on the day of the event, and nobody knew who the other firms would be, really. I said, what's your estimate of the average blended hourly rate? What do you think the average blended hourly rate of all the firms in the room on that day will be? And the control group response was the average response was $171 an hour. Control group means there was another group, right? So 50% of the participants received another question first. And the first question they received was this anchor question. I asked them, thinking of the firms who will be in the room on the day, do you think the average blended hourly rate will be higher or lower than $500 an hour? And these folks who were anchored first, their average response was 38% higher. By asking them first, everybody answered, I think the average blended hourly rate will be lower than $500 an hour. But by asking them the question and planting the seed of $500 an hour, I forced them to think of the more sophisticated, more expensive firms that they knew, and their answers skewed higher. There's no such thing as a boomerang effect to an anchor price that's too high. So you deliver your three-price option, you start with the most elaborate, most expensive option, you hit them with the price, the client can't hear what you say for the next 15 seconds because you've just dropped this price bomb on them, boom, all they hear is me, and you're talking. The job of that anchor price is not to sell the anchor solution. The job of that anchor price is what? Sell the next one to make the other options look more affordable. And I said there's no boomerang effect, where if it's so high, the average settled price through studies they do with mock juries, you can't really study this in your environment, but they study it with mock juries, they ask for a higher settlement, higher settlement, higher settlement. The average agreed upon settlement keeps going up. There's no one-to-one correlation, but they can plot it in a power curve. So it doesn't matter how big that number is, really. There's a caveat to that. I'm not going to get into it. We don't have time. But generally speaking, it doesn't matter. A friend of mine is an independent consultant. He had a client with a $30,000 budget. He sold them a $300,000 solution. Just imagine that. Client says, my budget's X. And you say, okay, I'll go away and come back with some different ways I can help. And you come back with 3 different ways you can help. And the client chooses the middle option, which is 10 times their budget. If $300,000, 10 times the budget, was the middle price, what do you suppose his anchor price was? Guess. Client's budget is $30,000. He started with an anchor price option, an anchor option that was priced at what? $60,000? So he settled at $300. It's higher than $300. The client bought at $300. $30 million. Try that on. Now, I don't know all of the details here, but I know 2 things about this guy, and he's a very good value pricer. One of his stories is in my book. If he put forward a $30 million solution to the client, number 1, he felt fairly strongly that he could create far in excess of that in value, probably in the $100 million range. Number 2, I'm almost certain that he put the majority of that compensation at risk. He said, you don't pay until I deliver on these value, I deliver on this value. I help you create $100 million in value. And I'm not saying it was a contingency payment all at the end, but he was getting paid based on value creation. So rule number 1, price the client, not the job. Rule number 2, offer options. Rule number 3, anchor high. Begin with the largest, most expensive solution. You follow those 3 rules, you're going to do great. Rule number 6, I'm skipping over 4 and 5, limit your proposals to 1 page. I don't know why that's funny. We see SaaS companies, they do this all the time, right? Get it down to 1 page. I don't have time to talk about the merits or the specifics of that, but just get it to 1 page and see it as a talking point. Begin with highest, most expensive option. You do that, I think that most of you can improve your profitability by 50%. I actually think that's really low. Okay, there's a whole other level, right? How are we for time? We're all right. You're going to do an exercise. Whole other level is when you can learn to master the value conversation. I'll tell you what rule number 4 is. Rule number 4 is your client should always hear a price before they see a price. Your client should always hear a price before they see a price. So before you go away and say, I'm going to come back with before you go away and produce a proposal, tell them what the price range is going to be. I'm going to come back with some multiple different ways that we can help not in the X to Y range, but in the Y to X range, because whenever we're talking numbers, we want to lead with the biggest numbers, right? We're anchoring even in this conversation. So that's the topic of this, mastering the value conversation. At Win Without Pitching, we train you how to navigate through the sale in 4 conversations. Our overarching methodology is that there are 4 linear discrete conversations in the sale. Again, this is a healthy generalization. And you simply ask yourself, which conversation am I in? What is the objective of this conversation? And what framework should I be using to navigate to the objective? So there are 4 conversations. Very quickly, there's the probative conversation in which you move from the vendor to the expert. You move in the mind of the client, you go from being a vendor to the expert practitioner, and there's a power shift that happens in the probative conversation. Ideally, the probative conversation happens without you present, through your thought leadership or your referrers, things that Mark O'Brien was talking about. After that is the qualifying conversation. This is the standard sales conversation where you're vetting the lead to see if an opportunity exists so you can determine the next steps, while maintaining that expert practitioner position you gained in the previous conversation, the probative conversation. The value conversation is the third of 4 conversations. This is the one we're going to talk about. And that's where you endeavor to determine the value that you might create for the client and the share that you might command in the form of compensation while maintaining the expert practitioner position. And then the closing conversation is where you seamlessly transition from the sale to the engagement while maintaining the expert practitioner position. Now, I talk about this a lot, conversations instead of presentations. You come out of the creative side of the business. I don't know the tech side or the dev side quite so well, but I know you come out of the creative side, you're taught not to have conversations. All the communications are one way. The client talks amongst themselves, they lob an RFP at you, you talk amongst yourselves, you lob something back, it goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. We're horrible at conversations in the creative businesses. So we need to get back to this place of new business isn't about improving your presentation skills. It's about deprogramming yourself of the need to present. It's about having a conversation with another human being, finding out what it is that this human being wants. I talked about this in my first book, The Win Without Pitching Manifesto. It's the second proclamation. We will replace presentations with conversations. And that's what we're going to do here today. So the value conversation, again, determine the value you might create and the share you might command. I just want to point out quickly here that not all value is economic. There's 2 forms of economic value, revenue gains and cost reductions, and then there's this murky area that's known as emotional contributions to value. At the end of the day, value is really just a feeling. When you're doing the exercises over the next few minutes, I'm going to ask you to identify the value that you might create. And I want you to think of the economic value in terms of revenue gains and cost reductions, but I also want you to think about the emotional contributions to value. Here it is, the value conversation framework. It's simple. It's not necessarily easy. It's 4 steps. Step number 1, you find out from the client. What do you want? What do you want, Madam Client? What is it that you really want to be true at the end of all of this? DFS stands for desired future state. What is the desired future state of the client? After you find out what the client wants, then you find out what are the things that we'll measure to prove or determine that you have achieved what you want. What are the metrics of success, or KPIs, key performance indicators? What are the things that we can measure to prove that you've achieved what you want? Step number 3 is, if we help you get what you want and we hit these metrics, what's the value of this to you? What's the economic value to the organization? And what's the value to you personally? And step number 4 is, if we helped you create this value, what would you be willing to pay for that? This is the value conversation. This is the simple 4-step framework for the most valuable skill in all of business, I believe. And yet, we have a really hard time doing this. One of the reasons we have a hard time doing it is what I talked about. We're taught to present and not to converse. But there's another reason, and I'm going to talk to you about it after you do the first exercise. So, we're going to do an exercise. Everybody needs paper to write on, so the notebook that you have, and a pen. If anybody doesn't have one of those two things, please hold up your hand. At the back, I'm assuming there's people in here that can help me, but there are books and pens. You're good? Okay. This requires you to pay close attention. Here's the exercise. Find something to write on. So everybody's got that? Number 2, choose a partner and introduce yourself. Now, if you came with a business partner, find somebody else. This is going to be messy. I'm not going to give you enough time. I'm not going to give you enough information. On your own, so that you do this exercise on your own, this next step on your own, not with your partner, on your own, I want you to identify a current business challenge that you have. You're all owners, right? So you have no shortage of business challenges. A business challenge that you have spending authority for. If you somehow snuck into this room and you're not a business owner, and there's nothing that you have spending authority for in your business, then you can pick a personal challenge for which you have spending authority. But I think this will be the first room I've ever done this in where everybody should be able to pick a business challenge for which you have spending authority. Now, I want you to write that challenge at the top of the page because your partner is going to conduct a value conversation on this. That's why I had you choose the partner first, because if it's your biggest direct competitor, and your challenge is, we don't know what we're doing, or the bank's going to foreclose, then you probably don't want to communicate that to your direct competitor. But I think we're all good here. So just write the name of the challenge, just so you understand what it is, at the top of your piece of paper. Okay? You have 20 seconds. Try not to write the solution. Try to write the challenge. But if you write the solution, that's fine. I envy the people who are having a hard time coming up with business challenges. Are we good? No, sorry, we've done that. Right. Hand your piece of paper to your partner. Don't jump ahead. Don't, just, this is a 10-second step. Okay. Okay, we got to move quickly. Next step. Decide which of you two is going to be the consultant first and who will be the client first. This takes 10 seconds. Go. Decide who's going to be the consultant first. Okay. John. Where's John? We've just lost power. Step 7. Thank you. The consultant will now conduct don't jump ahead, will conduct a 4-step value conversation recording notes on the client's paper. I'm going to give you the framework again. I'm giving you not enough time, and I'm giving you not enough information on how to do it. And then, so you're only doing one conversation, all 4 steps, one conversation, then you're going to stop. Then I'll give you a little bit more information before you do it the second time, before you switch. So you're going to have 10 minutes for which to have this conversation. It's only the first conversation. So your page should look something like this. So you're going to make a note of, like, what is it that you want? So first you're going to ask the clarifying questions around the challenge. Tell me a little bit about the challenge in your business. You're going to have to move quick. You only have 10 minutes for all of this. And then it's, okay, however you want to get to what is it the client need or want, however you want to get there, whatever killer questions you have, use them and find out what it is that the client wants. And make bullet point notes about the client's desired future state. And then see what it is, which of these things that the client wants to be true can we measure? And then ask the client to help you with like, well, what's the value of us like hitting these metrics and you getting what you want? And then ask the client, what would they be willing to pay for this? Get a range out of them. You don't have near enough information, you have 10 minutes, go. All right, time. Stop. Okay, everybody, stop. Stop, stop, stop. Okay. Now, those of you who are just the consultant, thank you for doing that with very little information. We're going to talk about what you experienced after we do the exercise the second time. But now we're going to change roles. With the new consultants, I'm going to layer in a little bit more information. So, under desired future state, there's a question I'd like you to ask. First, you're going to look at the challenge and you're going to ask whatever clarifying questions come to mind about just some overall information about the challenge and the nature of the firm, etc. But then I want you to ask what I think is the most powerful question in all of sales. There is an entire book written about this question. It's called the Dan Sullivan question. He calls it the R-factor question. I call it the 3-year question. And this is it. It's 3 years from today. You and I are having coffee. You're really happy with your progress over the last 3 years. What has to have happened for you to be so happy? Now, let's unpack this question first. Why is it that I think this is the most powerful question in all of sales? What do you see about this question that you see as being powerful or novel? I'm assuming a relationship in 3 years, and that's why Dan Sullivan calls it the R-factor question, where the relationship is assumed. So we all know Mark O'Brien. Mark's a friend of mine, and I was speaking at an event last year, and he knows the question. He was taught it in Strategic Coach the same time I was taught it. And I was speaking at an event last year run by our friend David Baker, and David and I were up on the stage, and we were taking questions from the audience, and Mark got up to the microphone, and he said, "It's 3 years from today. You and I are having coffee. You're really happy with your progress over the last 3 years. What's happened to make you so happy?" And I realized in that moment that without context, it's a meaningless question. It's a meaningful question when you ask your client this in the sale because they infer a relationship. It's so open, it requires context, they bring the context. That's the first reason it's powerful. Why else is it powerful? It assumes some level of success because they're happy. What you're doing is you're leaping them past all of the reasons why they can't do this, all of the problems in their way, and you're putting them into their desired future state. All high-gain questions in sales do this. They put the client into the future, and they say, "You are successful. Describe success for me." Because what happens is when you begin to imagine that successful place and you begin to describe it, you start to achieve the emotional benefits of having changed, of having arrived in that desired future state. So when a salesperson asks me that question, I think, "Oh, I know what you're trying to do." And then I say, "Okay, it's 3 years from today." You get this serotonin release from describing success. So it puts the client emotionally into the desired future state. And another reason it's so powerful, because the question is about what's it going to take to make you happy? It's not about what are the corporate needs of this project. You are so far beyond that. The client will give you all of the things that have to be true about the project from a corporate point of view. But you want to get to the emotional parts of value. You want to get to what it is that this person values. She'll tell you about the economic stuff, but you want to get to what is it that this person really wants. So I want you to have the experience of asking or answering this question and see, we'll talk about how it feels to ask it, and we'll talk about how it feels to answer it. You may have to ask some follow-up questions after that. Again, so some clarifying questions at first, but then fairly quickly into step 1, I want you to ask the 3-year question. It'll be on the screen. And then in the 4th step, I want you to use a technique that I call anchoring against guaranteed value. Because what would you pay for this? I'm sure those consultants you were asking that, you're finding that's a kind of a difficult question to ask. I'm going to give you a specific way to ask it. I want you to anchor against guaranteed value. I want you to say to your client, if I could, so you've just recapped all the value that you might create for the client. The question is this: if I could guarantee you that we created this value, the open-ended question is, what would you pay for it? But I want you to ask the closed-ended question: would you pay X? So if I could guarantee you that we created this value that we just talked about, you might need to summarize it, would you pay X? So you have to do some math in your head about, well, if I could guarantee this, how much do you think I could get the client to pay? What do I think would be fair? So, and I'm not going to give you any guidance on how to do the math. You do it, and we'll talk about what you came up with. But this question begs a question, right? If I asked you this question, if I could guarantee this value, would you pay me $1 million? You're going to want to know what? Sorry? Yeah, how do you guarantee? Are you saying, Blair, that you're going to guarantee this? And my answer is, oh, I don't know. I haven't even thought about solutions yet. It's just a hypothetical question. I just want to know if I could guarantee this, because the answer is, and we'll get there in a minute, maybe I'll come up with a guaranteed solution, maybe I won't, but I haven't thought about solutions yet. We're just still focused on you, Madam Client, the value that we might create for you. If I could guarantee you that we created this value, what you're doing is you're looking for the theoretical maximum that the client would pay. Because every price you deliver in your proposal will have an uncertainty discount built in. So we're removing the uncertainty in this hypothetical question, saying, if I could guarantee it, would you be willing to pay X? So you've got to guess at a really high number as a percentage of the value that you propose to create, and you'll do whatever math is appropriate. And then from there, it's not until you retreat to the office after the value conversation, then you start to think about, well, do we want to guarantee a solution? Okay, so we're switching roles. It's the same framework. You are writing on your client's piece of paper. You're going to have 10 minutes. You're going to do the same 4 steps. I want you to use these 2 techniques, the 3-year question and anchoring against guaranteed value. 10 minutes, go. Was that enough time? Some of you were done in 5 minutes, right? Some of you, yeah. Do you have more time in the real world to have a conversation like this? Usually, yeah. Okay, let's go slowly here. We have, we can't go too slow. We don't have a lot of time. I bought 15 minutes from Mark O'Brien last night for $15,000. At dinner, I bought 15 of his minutes. And then today, I borrowed 15 minutes from Carl and $15,000 from Carl to pay Mark. So I might go as late as 5:25, and Carl said he'll do his wrap-up in 5 minutes. Okay, what happened in that why did I have you do this exercise? Not the value conversation exercise, but no, let me ask this a different way. How many of you forgot to have a conversation about solutions, about what it is you would do? Hands up. We didn't get into it. Congratulations. I said this is the most valuable skill in all of business, but it's really hard to do. Why is it hard to do? I said, number one, we're not very good at conversations. But there's another reason. Another reason we're not good at, it's hard to master this value conversation is I believe there's 2 fundamental types of expertise. There's subject matter expertise and there's process expertise. You people are subject matter experts. When you get into a conversation with the client, if you think of this framework, the framework is, it's all about the client, right? Your focus was on the client. What does the client want? What does success look like to her? How much value might be created for her? What's the price she might pay? At the end of the value conversation, you are 3/4 of the way through the sale. It's the 3rd of 4 conversations. You're now 3/4 of the way through the sale. And if you've done this properly, you have not once talked about or thought deeply about your solutions. And the reason it's hard to get this far into the sale and have the focus be entirely on the client and not about you, not about your solutions, not about what you usually do, what you usually charge, what it's going to cost you. The reason it's so hard to do this is You're a subject matter expert. You, my friend David Baker says, you see patterns everywhere. Client starts talking about their challenge, and you go, oh, I know what your problem is. I know what the solution is. We usually build X. It's between this and that. It costs this long, takes this long, costs this much money. You jump ahead. And the key to mastering the value conversation is to let go of solutions altogether and to have the focus be entirely on the client. So I had you do the first value conversation where ideally I asked you to substitute process expertise for subject matter. Remove your subject matter expert hat, because hopefully for most of you, you're doing a value conversation for a business challenge that you are not in the business of helping solve. That should make the exercise easier for you. You're focusing on the process, navigate the client through the conversation. And if you are an expert in what that client's solving the challenges that was written at the top of your piece of paper, you're immediately going to jump ahead to solutions. In fact, a whole bunch of you are not subject matter experts on that subject, but you still leapt ahead to solutions. You probably started talking to your client about solutions, but nowhere in the 4 steps that I gave you was there anything about solutions. So your focus was exactly, or should have been exactly where it should be. It should be on the client. What do you want, Madam Client? What are the things that we'll measure to determine if you've achieved what you want? What's the value of you getting what you want? If I could help you get what you want, what would you be willing to pay for this? There's nothing in there about you. Your focus was not you, it was not your solutions, it was not your prices, and it was not your costs. You let go of the solution. And that is not easy to do. That's the thing that you need to deprogram yourself of if you want to master the value conversation. So I have a friend, I hardly ever see her. We don't live in the same place anymore. Her name is Anne. And when I see Anne, it's always a brief meeting, and my reaction is always the same. Oh my God, I love Anne. I'll call my wife and say, oh, you won't believe, I just ran into Anne. And she'll go, oh my God, I love Anne. How is Anne? And I'll say, oh, Anne is, I don't know. Because she did it to me again. What did Anne do to me? She said to me, Blair, how are you? How are you? How are the kids? How's Colette? How's the business? Have you been anywhere interesting these days? Tell me all about you. Anne makes me feel like I am the only thing that matters to her when I talk to her. Now, you take that skill, and we all know somebody like this, right? You take that skill and you transpose it into a business context. That is the most valuable skill in all of business. But you have to move off of the solution. So what did it feel like to be asked the 3-year question? Those of you who were the clients in the second part, and you were asked the question, how did it feel? And not everybody's going to be talking rainbows and unicorns, but how did it feel to you? Empowering for you as the client. Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else? Excited? You get into the future state, you start to get excited about all the things that have come to you, and you start imagining them happening. How did it feel to ask that question? Great. Some of you felt awkward about it, right? Why did you feel great? Yeah. Yeah, often the client will state the challenge as the solution, and your job is to get past that. And the typical approach in sales is to ask 5 whys. What do you need? Website. Why do you need a new website? Because the old one's not performing well. Why is the old one not performing well? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I call that peeling the onion of need. And I used to teach that approach. And then when I heard the Dan Sullivan question, I realized if you have to ask 5 whys, the first question is a pretty shitty one, right? This gets right to the heart of what the human being wants. And the feeling, when you do this properly, not all the time, but the feeling is often on the client end is, oh my God, that was a fantastic conversation. It's like my conversations with Anne aren't really conversations. She makes me feel like they are because she's listening and she's intently focused on me. We don't do this. We go into pitches. Even when we go into conversations, we're always bringing solutions with us. We see the patterns. They're like dead people in the sixth sense. We see them everywhere. Your job, if you want to master the value conversation, if you want to go to take the business to the next level, your job is to let go of the solution. Now, think of my friend Cal, who went in and uncovered that there's 100 clients said, I've got $30,000 to do X. I don't even know what X was. And he uncovers in the value conversation that there's $100 million in opportunity in value to be created here. And he goes back to the office and he asks himself, what's the most I could do for this client? What's the highest level of certainty I could do to help bring that value to the client, create that value for the client? And he comes up with a super elaborate solution. And he goes back to the client and says, I have 3 different ways I can help. And the first one is really elaborate. I asked myself, what's the most I could do to help you? What's the highest degree of certainty I could deliver to you that you will create this value? And hold on to your hats because the answer costs $30 million. Whee! But you can see this isn't about manipulating the client. This is about changing the focus from you and your solutions and your inputs and your costs to the client. So I have a question for you. The question is, what is the goal of value-based pricing? Change the focus. The goal of value-based pricing is to create an organization intently focused on creating extraordinary value for the client. When you learn to master the value conversation, everything will change for you. When you see people in your firm start to master the value conversation, everything will change for your firm. What happens is you start to let go of the solutions and you go into these conversations focused on the client, open-minded about value creation. You let go of the solutions, then you come back to the studio and say, we could create $100 million in value here. Let's brainstorm. Then what happens is what really should happen. Every one of your client engagements becomes an exercise in creativity. You get out of this notion, we do X for these types of people. And oh yeah, I see that, we're going to sell you X. It's not about you. I wanted to say, fuck you. Now I'm turning into Gary V. I apologize. It's not about you. That is the point of value-based pricing. To get your focus off of you. I don't care what your working method, I don't care if you're in the Agile camp or the Waterfall camp. Doesn't matter. I don't care what it is you do specifically. It really doesn't matter. I mean, of course it matters. Positioning matters. All these things matter. But when you're in front of the client and the client says, here's the value I'm looking to create, what's going to happen is you're going to look at this and go, oh my God, look, the world is your oyster. You're going to stress the boundaries of your business model. You're going to come back and go, well, why don't we, if we could create $100 million, like what, if you do a proper brainstorming session, what are the things we could do to help the client create this value? You're going to come up with things like buy another company. You're going to come up with things you've never done before. Now, it doesn't mean you go back and present a proposal with those options, with those radical options. But you're going to start to think differently about your engagements. Engineering-based businesses, so dev shops run by engineers, this isn't a knock, it's just a statement of fact, it's a bit of a generalization, but your strengths are like your ability to mitigate risk, you're linear, process-oriented, etc. But the danger is you get so locked into how we work and how our engagements should be structured. And everybody thinks that Agile means you can only do time and materials. That is such bullshit. This community thinks you have to sell the inputs of time because of the methodology that I think is a fantastic methodology, but you think that necessitates that you have to sell time and you can't price based on value, that's bullshit. The real reason you guys are adamant that you want to sell sprints, you want to sell time, I'm not saying get away from that completely, but the real reason you're adamant about it is it's your personality, it's in your nature to mitigate risk. And when you sell inputs of time and materials, it is the lowest risk pricing option available to you. You push all the risk to the client. I said my friend Cal, when he put the $30 million solution in front of his clients, I know he put the vast majority, maybe all of that compensation at risk. He took all of the risk. And I have resolved that every day that I am working where I'm speaking to an audience like you, I will share my favorite Peter Drucker quote. In business, all profit comes from risk. Your pricing models, in most of your firms, you're pushing all the risk to the client. And the real reason isn't some truism out in the market or some truism about your project management methodology. The real reason is your aversion to risk. You want visibility into the future. You want things to be clean. And what I'm saying to you is that's okay. You're not evil. You're not wrong. You're not making a massive mistake. But the pursuit of efficiencies, and that's what you're doing, comes at a cost. And the cost is extraordinary profits because you're not allowing yourself to focus on the client, think creatively about the value that you might create and the ways that you might create value, and then come back to the client with multiple ways that you can help, including a high-risk, high-reward option. So this is the goal of value-based pricing, to create an organization intently focused on creating value for the client. Making shitloads more money is just a delightful consequence. I'm going to wrap up quickly. I inserted these slides when I heard Becky speak earlier today. Dev firms remind me a lot of industrial design firms because you're effectively building the product. Anybody ever heard of this firm outside of Cleveland? They bought one of the Rockefeller's churches and spent $16 million renovating it. They're in the innovation business. That's the inside of their agency. They designed all these products. And when I first met the business development person from this firm, he was in a seminar I was running in Chicago. He wanted to impress upon everybody in the room how successful this firm was. And I said, yeah, I'm sure they are. And at the break, he came up to me and said, you don't understand, the owners of this firm are worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And I said, industrial design, right? He said, yeah. And I said, you get paid a percentage of sales or you keep the IP and license it to your clients. He said, sometimes we don't even wait for the clients. We see an opportunity in the marketplace, we start designing it, we patent it, and then we sell it. This toothbrush that you're seeing, these are all products they designed. This mechanical toothbrush that they designed for Dr. John's, they structured the deal so that they got paid. I don't know the initial parts. I've since gotten to know one of the owners a little bit. But when the company was sold to Procter & Gamble, the design firm was paid $80 million. Deal after deal like this. They would go to these clients and say, what's your worst performing product? And the company would say, well, here's the product. And they'd say, okay, here's a proposal for how we can help take that product from a poor performing to a good performing product. Here are 3 different ways you can pay us. Hundreds of millions of dollars. I'm going to wrap up with this. I was speaking in Adelaide, Australia a few months ago, and if you've been to Adelaide, where's the Aussie here? Where are you from? Regional Queensland, okay. So if you've been to Adelaide, you know it's wine country, so everybody's getting pissed before my talk, which makes for a pretty good talk. And this designer comes up to me and he said, I saw you speak 8 years ago and something you said like changed the trajectory of my business life. He said, I left your talk and I launched a gin brand. This is his design firm. I said, what did I say? He said, you said don't wait for the client. Be the client you want to be in the world. If you see a great idea, go do it. I said, how's business? He said, it's pretty good. We've got national, do you know this gin brand? It's great. We've won national awards, international awards. We now have international distribution. And he said, a month ago, a block from here, I opened my own bar. and I moved my studio to the back of the bar. There are so many different ways you can get paid. You think of Nottingham Spurk. Pay us a percentage of the sales, or pay us a bonus if you sell the company. Right? The danger is to think that there's one way to price. If I stood up here and said you should only value price all the time, I would be as wrong, as ignorantly wrong as the person who says you should only sell sprints or you should pursue, all your clients should be on retainer. Those absolutes, as most absolutes in life are, they're wrong. What you should be doing is you should be putting your focus on the client. It's not about you. It's about the client. What does the client want? How much value can you create for the client? What would the client be willing to pay? And then you then you scope the engagement and you price it. And you've already got pricing guidance. So you set a range and then you kind of work within that range as you put together your different bundles. And you go back and you say, there's 3 different ways we can work with you. Let me begin with a $30 million solution. So I'm going to finish by trying to sell you some books. That's the book. It's called Pricing Creativity. There are 3 different ways you can buy it. $320, $199, or $100. And for the rest of this week, if you use that code OS19, you can buy the expensive option for the middle price, $120 off. I want to thank you for not only your time, but for agreeing to participate, not that you had a choice, in the exercises. I hope you found it helpful. I'm doing the Ask Me Anything with Dan Mall tomorrow, so we'll have time for questions then, but there will be no questions right now. Thanks for your time. Thank you, Carl.